And we're going to start off with a couple of old friends. They're not that old, but they're my older friends. And that would be Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers. Good morning to the two of you.
Morning, Michael. It's wonderful to be here at
It's
the
great to
Heartland.
have you guys come all the way up from the wonderful South Side, from Hyde Park on a nice day. I know my wife was going the other way to do some teaching, the special teaching down there at the lab school. And you may have passed each other on the way.
I think so.
Just before the New Year, I started getting some emails, probably forwarded to me, that you had written, Bernardine, about an experience that you and Bill were both having in Gaza, in Egypt. And basically, it was the Gaza Freedom March was taking place or trying to take place. Humanitarian aid was going to be brought from people around the world through Egypt into Gaza, and the Egyptian government tried to stop it. Can you, one of you, start off and tell us a little bit about how this event started and how it came to be?
Sure, Michael. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I love being at the Heartland. Everybody should come right over here.
We're not allowed to give calls to action, but that was a good one.
Bring your friends here and have your meetings here. We got the same kind of flurry of emails, and Bill, it was Bill's 65th birthday over the Christmas holidays, so
I had no idea he was that old.
I know. We played with the idea of what he wanted to do, and what he wanted to do was go on the Gaza Freedom March. So we, along with 1,400 people from 42 countries, found the cheapest airfare we could find and got ourselves to Cairo 2 days after Christmas, with the idea that Code Pink and a group of Palestinian activists and peace activists had come up with, which was to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the really horrific and violent assault on Gaza by Israel a year ago, and by having a huge peace march on New Year's Day in Gaza, and with people from all over the world expressing their solidarity and breaking the blockade. You'll remember that a year ago, Israeli military assaulted Gaza relentlessly for 3 weeks, right at the turn of the new year. And since then, the border has been sealed, really, and there's been a blockade on Gaza. And the suffering inside among the civil society, among the ordinary people, has been just enormous. So the idea of being in Gaza at the New Year on a peace march must have appealed to 1,400 people, because all kinds of people made their way there. What happened, of course, is that I think the United States, Israel, and Egypt colluded to say no, they weren't going to let this march happen. Just the visual idea of a peace march in Gaza is counter to the narrative that Gaza is just a bunch of terrorists, that it's all Hamas, that it's terrorists. So it wasn't going to be allowed, and we were told as we landed in Cairo that we could only stay, we weren't allowed to leave Cairo at all, even to try to get to the border at Rafah.
So what happened?
Well, then you had 1,400 pissed off people trying to raise the issue of Gaza in Cairo, and that's what we did for 8 days. We demonstrated, we had peace vigils, we had hunger strikes, we went to the American embassy, the French occupied the French embassy, we went to the pyramids. Of all things, Netanyahu, the head of Israel, came to speak to Mubarak, the head of Egypt, right while we were there. We had a huge demonstration there. And we basically tried to, you know, block traffic, raise banners, be a highly visible force in the Arab world, saying that the people of the world have not forgotten the Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank and the occupied territories. And, you know, occupation is a dreadful thing. I mean, I think Americans can't quite imagine what it's like to live under an occupation. And that's what we hoped to witness, and instead we had to imagine it.
You know, I have to say that I had not heard about this very much, and I don't think I saw any coverage of this going on in the American press.
There was one New York Times story, but there was a lot on the blogs, and you had to be tuned into it in order to see it.
Bill,
Well,
can you... go
And
ahead.
in the Arab world, the coverage was quite extensive of our attempts, because when Bernardine says we block traffic and so on, the delegation, the complicated thing was we were being denied the right to get to the border. The only reason we were in Egypt is because it borders Gaza, and we intended to get to Gaza.
The rest of Gaza is surrounded by Israel.
That's right, and the sea. And we had decided that we were going to try to get to Gaza. So every time we stepped off the curb and tried to march to Gaza, of course, we were surrounded by police and military and pretty much roughed up. But our point was not to fight with the Egyptians or to get into a match with that government. Our point was to shine a light on Gaza, to show what occupation looks like up close. And the Arab media picked it up big time. The American media noted the anniversary of the Israeli assault by interviewing people in a border village in Israel and how much they had been fearful during that time of rockets. But the reality is far different from that, and that's what the rest of the world sees, and we still don't.
Can either of you give us a little background on Gaza, a little picture of the history of Gaza?
Well, I'm not a historian, but I'll tell you, I just
But
try
you know
to
some
draw
history.
a picture. Well, we did a lot of reading going there. You have right in front of you a wonderful new book, a graphic novel by Joe Sacco called Footnote in Gaza. Sacco is a great cartoonist who wrote a beautiful book about Palestine 10 years ago. And this is called...
And did one on Sarajevo, too.
Yeah.
Right, Footnote in Gaza by Metropolitan Books. Here it is. Picture this. It's a tiny 13-mile-long, 1-mile-wide strip. It would be like just taking the strip along Lake Michigan.
It would actually be from the Evanston border to downtown.
That's exactly right. And with the sea at one side and Israeli warships totally blockading the sea. Surrounded on all sides, two sides by Israel, with massive wires and barricades and walls, and then one side by Egypt. And there's 1.5 million people living there. I happen to have been there exactly 20 years ago with Rashid Khalidi and a delegation. That's part of why I was hoping to go 20 years later. I was there during the first Intifada. And so it's a very odd place, and people found themselves there 60 years ago when the State of Israel was created, and then after the '67 war, when Israel occupied the Sinai and the Golan Heights and Gaza and the West Bank. And so the people there, there's native Gazans, but there's primarily a lot of refugees who used to live in what was Palestine, Israel, before this kind of military occupation. So it's a tiny, tiny strip of land, and efforts to develop it in the sense that it has this beautiful seacoast and it has some highly talented, highly educated people, Palestinian people, ironically, like the Jewish people, right, a highly literate, educated population, have been absolutely thwarted, undone, and destroyed by the Israelis and the United States' support for them. So the suffering there is just enormous in Gaza as a civilian population. And, 2 years ago, there was the first election. They voted for Hamas.
And we were
It
talking
would be like
earlier.
us voting for, Bush and Cheney. I mean, should we be blockaded, punished, starved, denied basic medical things, water, supplies, building things, because we made poor voting choices?
It would be like the federal government cutting off aid to Massachusetts now. Because this guy Brown was elected.
Exactly. Or I think all of us being punished for 8 years of Bush and Gore, and Bush and Cheney. We went as a people-to-people mission, having nothing to do really with governments or supporting this or that faction inside of Israel, inside of either Israel or the occupied territories. But I guess the point I'd like to make, Michael, is that I think that the issue of Palestinian independence and statehood and recognition and an end to the occupation, why does it matter here when we have, jobs, health care, permanent state of war, and suffering? And I think the issues are linked. I guess that's my view, is that these things are connected. As long as the United States is seen in the world and is in fact, in reality, a military, occupying, militarizing, war-making, war-mongering force, we will be hated, be at risk, and not be able to have the kind of things that the richest country in the history of the world should have for all of its citizens here. So meanwhile, we're suffering here with half of our budget, half of our tax dollars going to war. And a large part of this, the largest recipient of U.S. aid is Israel, followed closely by Egypt. It's mind-boggling. The American people don't know that we spend how much money we spend sending it to Israel and to Egypt for weapons.